Welcome back. All right, so in light of this being the summer and looking around and thinking, all right, so which playlist could I start? What could I revisit? And what I can revisit is a playlist that I did 5 years ago, where I talked about my favorite players in each team. And I feel like now I've got a better set, and I've got 21 players on the board this time rather than 15. Last time it was 15. So this board's getting a workout over the last few weeks, and it's going to continue to over the rest of the summer. But I thought, hey, go to 21. 21 favorite players that I've ever watched play for the Vancouver Canucks. And there's been a lot of change over the last 5 years in terms of which Canucks are my favorites looking back. And I would anticipate for other teams that'll be the case as well. So 1 through 21. And hey, Utah should be easy, right? Because there's 23 men on a roster, and I'm kidding. Utah, I'll probably have it like Utah, Arizona combined, right? But 1 through 21, my favorite Canucks. Everybody understands? All right. And my favorite thing with this is always people telling me I'm wrong. Think about it. Your favorite players. Like, if you said my favorite flavor of ice cream is chocolate, that would be wrong because vanilla is better and so strawberry. And, chocolate's good in Tin Roof Sundae, but seriously. Anyways, now that I've got everybody craving ice cream, and I'm kidding, chocolate ice cream's perfectly serviceable, excellent. But my point is that favorites are favorites. And my favorite player and somebody else's favorite player are going to be different. I think what throws people off is that the biggest stars on the team aren't necessarily my favorite players. That, I think, is what throws people off. All right, number 21. And I went to 21 because I thought, hey, I haven't done 21, so I can do that this time around. And it is former defenseman Dave Babage. Dave Babage, when he came to Vancouver, the Canucks were a bit of a joke. And for anybody going, oh, they mean like now? No. We're talking like about a decade of just absolutely mediocre results, mediocre team, a dynasty built in the basement. They were the Doormat Dynasty headline on the Hockey News issue that I have is, I think, one of my favorites. Doormat Dynasty. It's like that is exactly what those Canucks were. And Babich was part of a Canucks team that turned that around. And in a period of like 4 years, the Canucks went from an also-ran that just, if they made the playoffs and weren't doing anything, to being all the way to the Stanley Cup Final in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. So, pretty strong run, and Babich deserves a lot of credit for that as well. Number 20 on the list. There we are. Another defenseman, Sammy Salow. Salow missed a lot of games with injury, but he didn't miss a game because of heart. He was a heart and soul player. He just had a lot of freak injuries with Sammy Salow, but he would play through them when he could, and nobody ever questioned his effort. Sammy Salow, always a lot of effort, always liked Sammy a lot, and it's a shame that the Canucks didn't win a Stanley Cup with him, because it's a shame the Canucks haven't won a Stanley Cup. That's just generally the story. But it doesn't work as a tagline, Vancouver Canucks 2025-2026. Isn't it a shame? But yeah, Sammy Salow at number 20. And I have nothing negative to say about Salow. And I shouldn't about any of these guys because, honestly, why would they be favorites? Then I'm going to start, hey, I don't like this guy, though. Okay, 19. Sometimes there are fans like that, though. They'll root for a team, but they'll hate all the players on it. Number 19. The internet's a weird place. Weird, strange, scary place. Number 19 is Doug Lidster, defenseman who played for the Canucks in the 80s, who they played into the ground. And he did play for other teams after that. He did win a Stanley Cup in 94 against Vancouver. It was the silver lining for me as a Canuck fan of knowing that Doug Lidster got a Stanley Cup ring. Lidster was one of the ultimate foot soldiers for the Canucks in the 80s. He was their blue line. There was no measurement of ice time, but Lidster's would have been very high because their defense was basically Lidster and Butcher. They played them both into the ground, as I remember it. And so, nothing but props for Lidster. I'll give an honorable mention to Garth Butcher as well. And Butcher dropped the gloves too. I sometimes wondered how he had the energy to drop the gloves during some of those games. But Lidster was an excellent player all around, and kind of a forgotten defenseman from that era because the team he played on wasn't very good and didn't get nearly as much attention as either team from Alberta did. Number 18 on the list, a current Vancouver Canuck. And I know there are a lot of people that don't like Elias Patterson. I'm going to specify which one because otherwise comment section is going to be like, does he mean DPD? No, DPD's been with the Canucks for 28 games? No, I don't mean DPD. But EP40, the Patterson that I've got that for right there. He's taken a drop for me over the last couple of years. Sure. I've been disappointed in his play, especially over the last year. However, it does not mean that I am going to start trashing the player. I've never trashed Patterson, and I still think he's young enough to turn things around and get back to at least a 90-point range, I would think. But I'm odd that way. That if I like a player, I still like a player. I don't just, the guy's a bum. I can't stand him. Yada, yada. But yeah, and it's not going to be the only one that people argue with me on. In fact, people are just going to argue with me on all of them. Because even though it's my list of these are my favorite players, people are going to argue. Number 17. So I mentioned Doug Lidster in the 80s. Stan Smeal was a big part of that 80s team. Honorable mention to Thomas Gradin, too. Gradin's not on the list. Just misses out, but Stan Smeal was the team captain. I do remember comments about Smeal as captain and comparisons with Gretzky. No, Smeal wasn't a superstar, but he worked hard. He had to. He wasn't necessarily as fast or as big as some of the other players on the ice, but he outworked a lot of players, and he still put up more than a point per game a few years there in Vancouver. And that was impressive considering how poor some of those Canuck teams were. So Stan Smeal, still a face of the franchise, and I still am surprised that they didn't give him a shot at the GM job. I think he would have been a fantastic general manager. I do. I think Stan Smeal, he's a heart and soul guy. He is, if you're going to have a person you look at and you say, now that is the epitome of the Canucks. Stan Smeal, I would say, is to Vancouver very similar to what Joe Thornton is now to San Jose. Very, very similar. Number 16, also from that era, and I've met him. I've shaken hands with him. He knows who I am. If he's watching this video, Darcy, you're number 16. Darcy Rhoda, a player that I liked a lot. I remember when I started watching hockey in 81, and then in 82 they went all the way to the final. Rhoda was a big part of that. And he is also, I think, an underrated forward from a time where, yes, everybody seemed to be getting points. I think that's how some players get overlooked, looking back to that era. But Rhoda was a really fun player to watch. I don't think I've actually done a career video on Darcy Rhoda. I'm just thinking this over. I'm thinking, I don't think I've ever done one. So that's due. That's absolutely due. I'm surprised just thinking it over. I don't think I've actually done one. But Darcy Rhoda was one of my favorites, and I have, I think, 3 different signed cards of his in this room, and I won't be surprised if we end up with more, because it's Darcy Rhoda, and he was a favorite of mine when I was a kid. One of the members of that team that's not going to be on this board is Richard Brodeur. Richard Brodeur would get an honorable mention as well. There are goalies on this board, though. There are definitely goalies on this board. Number 15. From the current Canucks, Connor Garland. So I've been talking about players that don't take a shift off, players that work really hard, players that give you their best effort every night. Yeah, that's Connor Garland. Garland is an amazingly talented player, and I say that as for. He's a top 6 forward. He's not ever going to be this, 85, 90 point level player or anything, but the effort's there. The talent, I think, is somewhat underrated at times. But I like Garland quite a bit. I know from Canuck games when I could afford to go see them live, that I was always impressed with Garland. That when you're watching the game, when you're there, when you're live and you're watching, and not just with the puck, but without the puck, I was always impressed with his anticipation of the play, his ability to get into the right spot and not to be in the wrong spot. And so, yeah, Garland, number 15 for me on this list. Number 14, back to the former Canucks. And he's dropped since the last time I did this, and it's not that Jeff Cornell did anything to drop down. It's just my opinions change over time. Jeff Cornell was a part of that early 90s Canuck team that all of a sudden didn't suck anymore. It was an amazing era where the Canucks stopped being terrible. And Jeff Courtnall, honestly, big props to the St. Louis Blues, because the St. Louis Blues kind of handed the Canucks a really good roster. A lot of players came over to Vancouver and had a good time, and St. Louis was busy spending a bunch of money, but they didn't have a great roster, and so Vancouver benefited Jeff Courtnall. Excellent player. His brother Russ played with him for a while too, and eventually both Courtnalls were gone, but Jeff Courtnall was my favorite of the two Courtnalls. Also, Russ wasn't a Vancouver Canuck for that long. Number 13 on the list is a current Canuck. So I've talked about players that have had injury concerns and all that. Well, Thatcher Demko, definitely. We know that Thatcher Demko's injury history is still an ongoing discussion. I'm not going to disagree that there's that concern. I have that concern myself. That's why they gave Lankinen the amount of money in the term that they did. But I'm also hopeful that going into this season, Demko is actually healthy, able to get through this season and get back to Vezina level form. And so he's number 13 for me. I've always liked Thatcher Demko. I've got a Demko jersey. In fact, if we look at this, let me just think of this. Demko I've got a jersey of. I've got a couple of jerseys with Patterson's name on the back. Yeah, that's it. I thought there'd be more already, but there are more to come that I have their names on the back of the jerseys. And Demko. What's fun for me is that, of course, being a fan of Vancouver, Boston, and Dallas, it was Demko, Swayman, and Ottinger all coming in around the same time. That made it a lot of fun for me. All right, number 12. Past, but in between the eras that we've basically been talking about here. And that's Marcus Nasland. While we're giving out honorable mentions, I can give Brendan Morrison an honorable mention too. Morrison, a center that gave an honest effort every night. But Marcus Nasland, excellent captain for the team. He famously or infamously stood at center ice and said, "We choked," after a playoff loss. I thought it was pretty ballsy of him to stand there at center ice and say to the Canucks faithful, "We choked," and to apologize for it. I think that was in 2003, where they had the 3-1 series lead on Minnesota, and then they didn't, and they were out. A season that still upsets me, because that was the year that I thought the Canucks, if they were going to win a Stanley Cup, that was the year that I thought it was going to get done. A lot of the top teams were out early in the 2003 playoffs, and that it just felt like there was a path there, and the Canucks just were not able to get it done against Minnesota Wild. But I never really blamed Marcus. One thing that I try to keep in mind is anytime a team I root for loses, I don't just turn around and blame like a star player. I will talk about certain players, of course, in a big game where I wish they'd played better. But I don't just blame a player. I really try not to do that, because it takes a whole team to win or lose when it comes to the playoffs. Hockey's not like basketball, where one guy could take over a game. All right, number 11. Tony Tanty. One of the first Canucks that was a consistently good goal scorer was Tony Tanny. I was a big fan of his. I remember when he came over from Chicago. There was some talk about what he might be able to do, but I think he overachieved. I think Tony Tanty overachieved in his time in Vancouver. And so Tony Tanny for me is just outside the top 10. Very, very close. Tony, if you're watching, I'm sorry. You're not quite in the top 10. I don't think he is. Maybe. Number 10, and this is a player who would be number 1 on a lot of people's lists. That's Pavel Beret. Beret still gets top 10 for me. Alex McGillney's not on the list. McGillney, to me, wasn't in Vancouver as long, and his time in Vancouver wasn't necessarily fantastic for large portions of it. He did have, I think, the 150-goal season there, which was very good, but Bure, on the other hand, was their best goal scorer, and to date is the best goal scorer the Canucks have ever had in their organization. It was an ugly divorce between Bure and the Canucks organization, but I think most Canuck fans now do not blame Bure for that, whereas at the time they did. I didn't really blame Bure. My issue with Bure at times was that he didn't score as many goals as he could have. And that was an issue that I had with Bure at the time. But even with that, I still think Bure is one of the most exciting players they ever had. And I thought Bure played his best hockey his first couple of years in the NHL. He came back, he back-checked, he threw hits. He was a lot of fun to watch. Not that he wasn't fun to watch later on as the big goal scorer, but yeah, I thought he had a better two-way game when he came into the NHL. So you guys can let me know why I'm wrong, but that's my opinion. Number 9. Greg Adams played with Beret. I don't think they were on the same line. As I remember it, I don't think they were on the same line. This one doesn't erase very well. That's right. All right, Greg Adams. And this is Gus Adams, not Greg C. Adams. They did have both Greg Adams on the team briefly. That was a fun time. That was when Greg Adams became Gus. And the other one was Greg C. Adams. But this is Gus Adams, Greg Adams. And he scored some big goals for the Vancouver Canucks. He was consistent, and I was very upset when the Canucks traded him. I was very upset when he left Vancouver. It was a trade. I think it was a trade to Dallas. But Greg Adams, one of my favorite players, and not much else to say, really, but a 30-goal threat. He did miss games with injury as well at points, but yeah, I always thought he gave a really good effort. Number 8, another goaltender. Kirk Mlan, regarded as Captain Kirk by a lot of Canuck fans. Kirk Mlan, an excellent goaltender, one of the last pure stand-up goaltenders. And like at the meetup that we had on Saturday, there was one of our goalies was sort of playing a similar style, and I may have made some Kirk Mlan references then. But Kirk Mlan honestly had some really good seasons in there. Unfortunate that 94 run didn't end up with a Canucks victory, unless you're a Rangers fan, in which case you're probably quite happy with that. But McLean had an insane run that spring, and yeah, I couldn't have him any lower than 8th on this list today. 7th, and a bit of a drop from where he was the last time I did this, but when Bo Horvat, the last time I did this list, Horvat was 2nd. Bo Horvat, to me, still one of my favorite Canucks. I know people didn't like how he left the team. I know his exit left a bad taste in a lot of Canuck fans' mouths, but Bo Horvat to me is still one of my favorites. Absolutely one of my favorites. And I think looking back, and I've started to see this too with like, should they not have traded Bo Horvat? No, they shouldn't have traded Bo Horvat. They really shouldn't have. They should have signed him. JT Miller should have been one that got traded. But hey, Bo Horvat's gone on to have some pretty decent numbers, or put up some pretty decent numbers with the Islanders. A little bit underwhelming this past season, but the Canucks would take him with those numbers. Absolutely would. The Canucks would take him as a second-line center. Yep. So, yeah, Horvat, I don't have any ill will towards him. I still have, I think there's 3 Horvat jerseys I have, and I'm not getting rid of them. I'm not. Like I saw at one point people saying, well, you could just put Bluger's name on the back. I'm not taking Horvat's name off any of those jerseys. I'm just not wearing them until that negativity around his name is gone. And then I can start wearing Horvat jerseys again. He was a good captain. Number 6. There we are. Number 6, also a former Canucks captain. So if they were captain of the Canucks during the time I watched, they are probably on the board. Trevor Linden. Linden, heart and soul player, played through a lot of injuries in the 94 run to the Stanley Cup final. The famous picture of Linden and McLean embracing after that heartbreaking loss. That was after the Game 6 victory, because it's a white jersey they're wearing. It doesn't matter. It's a fantastic picture of Linden and McLean. Most famous picture of the Vancouver Canucks, 2 players, and I think maybe the most famous Canuck picture from that 94 run. Linden was the Vancouver Canucks, and when he was part of the organization in a management role and then he stepped away, there were a lot of Canuck fans that were upset, myself included. I think the Vancouver Canucks organization needs Trevor Linden in it. I don't think he's ever coming back, but I do miss Linden being part of the team. Number 5, another player I miss being part of the team. But at least he's got a couple of Stanley Cup rings now in Florida, and that's Roberto Luongo. Luongo got a lot of criticism during his time in Vancouver, which he's not alone there. Patterson's going through that now. Linden certainly had that during his first go-around. I've seen really criticism. I talked about Beret, how there was criticism of him as well. So it's not something that's new to the Vancouver market. There's a lot of pressure on these guys. Luongo, it was the contract too. And I lost count of how many times people said, look, with Luongo's money, how much he's getting paid on that contract, we should be winning every game. And when I would point out, they only scored a goal. So you're saying he has to get a shutout to be worth the money? Cool. But yeah, that argument was always out there of how Bobby or Roberto Luongo, how he didn't give them the goaltending they needed. I thought he was great. His overall numbers were always very good, but it is a tough market. Absolutely. Number 4 on the list is 2 players for the price of 1. Yep. Because I don't think there's any point in me separating the Sadine Twins. The Sadine Twins are still very visible members of the Vancouver Canucks organization. I do think that at some point in time, one of them ends up becoming general manager. Maybe they co-general manage, but the Sadine Twins, a huge part of this organization for 25 years now, and it took them a while to get going, but once they got going, their chemistry together was ridiculous. So I don't feel like I can pick between Henrik and Daniel. Henrik was the setup guy. Daniel was the one that got the goals, but still, Henrik showed when Daniel was out that Henrik could get goals too. He just opted to pass. So, yeah, the Sadine Twins for me, I think they both get that number. They're both number 4. Third on the list, you guys knew this one was going to be high up, didn't you? The last time I did this list 5 years ago, yeah, Brock Boeser was 14th. He's number 3. And I really do like Brock Boeser quite a bit. I know that there's some risk to his contract because he's coming off of what was a down year, comparatively speaking, with the year before. But I've always liked the guy. I think he's a really nice guy too, which is part of it. And I think his competitiveness is there. I think he can get back to that 40 goal mark. And if he can't, and if he ends up with 30 to 35, that's fine. I do like Boeser a lot. I do wonder who his center is going to be this coming season, because that's the big question in Vancouver. But Boeser, I've always liked him. Number 2. So the last time I did this 5 years ago, you know how far back it was? I didn't have Quinn Hughes on the list. I didn't. Now he's number 2. Without Quinn Hughes, the Vancouver Canucks this past season, they don't get 90 points. Quinn Hughes is a huge difference maker, one of the best defensemen in the National Hockey League. And hey, that defenseman list, right? Everybody agreed with that. But Quinn Hughes, one of my absolute all-time favorite Canucks now. And I think it really is that just he's the captain. He takes that on knowing what a burden that is. He's watched that burden with players like Horvat, but he took it on. And so while everybody's getting ready for him to leave in 2027, I'm not, because that's 2 years from now. It's ridiculous to me how much people are like, oh, he's gone in 2 years. Oh, okay. All right. But anyways, he's here now, and here's to hoping for another fantastic season from Quinn Hughes. He is the best defenseman the Canucks have ever had, and it's not close. Which brings us to number 1. Number 1 will not surprise anyone who has been watching this channel for very long. It's Cliff Ronning. Has to be Cliff Ronning. He overcame being a smaller player. He was never the most talented player on a team, but he was very hardworking and fought through a lot of that back checking. And he put up some pretty decent point totals. And I still remember when he left the Canucks and went to the Coyotes, I was a very angry Canuck fan. In fact, that whole era made me angry because Adams was gone, Ronning was gone. Ronning they got nothing for. Cornell, I don't think they got anything for Cornell either. So they had this great era of players that obviously I like quite a bit. And then they all just left. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I understand that the team wasn't as good and that it needed some sort of changes. But I don't know, getting an asset back for a player would have probably been good too. But sure, let them all go for nothing. At any rate, it's been an interesting 45 years of watching the Vancouver Canucks that has led me to this list of 21 favorite Canuck players. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Of course, I hate all those players. That's why they're not on the list. I'm kidding. I could go to 40. I'm not going to go to 40. But thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for everything. I will talk to you again soon.